Our first reading this morning is Jeremiah chapter 17, verses 5 through 10. Thus says the Lord, "Cursed are those who trust in mere mortals and make mere flesh their strength, whose hearts turn away from the Lord. They shall be like a shrub in the desert and shall not see when relief comes. They shall live in the parched places of the wilderness, in an uninhabited salt land. Blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose trust is in the Lord. They shall be like a tree planted by water, sending out its roots by the stream. It shall not fear when heat comes, and its leaves shall stay green. In the year of drought, it is not anxious, and it does not cease to bear fruit. The heart is devious above all else. It is perverse. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, test the mind and search the heart, to give to all according to their ways, according to the fruit of their doings."
Our gospel reading for this Sunday comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9, verses 28 through 36. We're now towards the middle of the Gospel of Luke. Jesus has gone through teaching and preaching and healing, and now he has just called his disciples, all of them, and given them the mission that they are about to do. And he takes three of them, that he seems to have been closest to, Peter, James, and John, up high on a mountaintop with him. Now about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with them. Just as they were leaving them, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
I want you to take a second and think. When was your most powerful, positive religious experience? Just capture that in mind. What was your most powerful, positive religious experience? When was it? How old were you? What did it change about your life? Where was it? Was it here? Maybe. Maybe not. Probably not. If it wasn't, you're not alone. That's what I'm going to talk about today. Mine neither. Not here or at any church on Sunday morning. Not that I haven't had spiritual experiences, but the most profound, the most incredible ones always have happened somewhere else. Always have happened somewhere away from the stresses and the rigors of everyday life. My profound Christian experiences were at summer camps, at youth conferences, at church retreats, family camp, at General Assembly. Always somewhere else. Now, religious experiences in general are much more common in retreat than in everyday life. And in those spaces, freed from the frustration and stress of our lives, we're truly able to commune with God. It might be that you've got someplace in the Poconos that you like to go. It might be a mission trip or a worship conference that you went to or something you did as a teenager. Triennium is coming up this year, and I know for many of us that was where we had powerful faith experiences that strengthened. But whatever it was, you had an experience with the living God. I call these mountaintop experiences, not because they always have to happen on a mountaintop, but in the Bible, when they talk about holy places, one of the things they often say is the high places. That is, people often went up into the mountains to pray, and Jesus is no different. Moses went up on Mount Sinai to commune with God. Solomon went up on I don't remember which mountain, on a mountain to ask God for wisdom. It is a common thing to have gone up on mountains, but altitude isn't really a necessity, right? The story of Pittman is the story of one such place, right? This town was originally a camp meeting. That is, here was a place where people used to go away from their regular lives to be caught up in a religious experience. And they started coming back year after year because they loved it. And they said, it is good for us to be here. Let's live here. Let us build a dwelling place for ourselves. Nothing would be better than to bask in the glory of God in this place. And so tents turned into platforms, turned into cabins, turned into homes, and turned into this community. And I bet if you're here on Sunday morning, it is because at some point in your life you have had some sort of mountaintop experience. It might have been on an actual mountaintop. It might have been in your bedroom. It might have been in a hospital bedroom. But there was a moment for you when the heavens opened up and you caught a glimpse of the glory of God. And in today's gospel passage, we are hearing the story of a mountaintop experience experienced by Peter and James and John. They saw in that moment a vision of God's glory. You can imagine that much of their life was walking and talking. Much of their life was traveling and dealing with crowds that were kind of wild and sometimes pushy, dealing with antagonistic questioners, dealing with lots of frustrations. But up on the mountaintop, things were different. They saw Moses. They saw Elijah, two of the holiest people in their tradition. They heard God's voice. This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him. It has to have been an incredible experience. There's nothing like it. It was for them a vision of heaven. And after months, maybe years of walking and talking in dusty sandals and grumpy people, it must have been incredibly strengthening and reassuring to hear the voice of God. You're on the right track, Peter and James and John. Jesus is who it seems like he is. You can be sure and certain. And Peter, being the disciple most likely to say exactly what was on his mind at any given moment, says, Master, it is good for us to be here. Let's live here. Nothing could be better than for us to bask in the glory of God here in this place. This is obviously a holy place, and so here is the best place for us to stay. And the way they phrase it, they say, Peter didn't know what he was saying. And that's what you say, right? When somebody is saying something so obviously wrong, it's a little bit embarrassing for them. But it's not really all that obvious to us. Because we feel, I think, the same as Peter does all the time. When we have had an incredible religious experience, we're always trying to get back. I know I used to go to conferences year after year because I had an incredible experience and I wanted to go back. I said, let's live here. Let me build a dwelling place. Nothing would be better than to bask in the glory of God here in this place. But of course, we have to go back down again. That is what it is. For most of us, that's an economic thing, right? We've got to eat, and spiritual retreat does not put food on the table. I think of the monks in the really ancient traditions of the 300s and the 400s, and they would go off into some cave, and they would just pray all the time, and people would bring them food. I don't think that happens now. If I wander off, will you guys feed me? Maybe not. So we've got to eat, and that's one reason that we've got to come down the mountain, but that's not the crucial reason, right? I mean, retreat centers, worship experiences, oftentimes they're places where things are provided for us quietly. We don't have to cook our food, it shows up. We've got a place to stay, we don't have to go to work, we don't have to bundle our kids up to go outside, and that takes like half an hour, and I don't know how we lose our shoes all the time. We didn't rush to get home and get dinner on the table before we try to get our kids to practice or this or that or wherever we need to be. Retreats are often places where things are taken care of. Of course, that's not cheap. But if we could stay up on the mountaintop, if we had that ability for whatever reason, it would still be a failure of Christian discipleship to stay. Because Christianity is not about walking around with our heads in the clouds. Christianity is not about rising up to heaven. Christianity is about bringing heaven down to earth. This is the miracle of the incarnation, right? We worship a God who is not distant from us, a God who did not stay up in heaven, but instead came down to live and dwell among us. A God who chose not the glory of heaven, but the messiness of earthly life, the ordinariness of earthly life. The movement of Christian faith is not upward, but downward. It is from God into earth. It's about bringing that heavenly glory that we've seen up on the mountaintop all the way into the earthly, ordinary places, into the nooks and crannies of our everyday lives. Not abandoning earthliness in favor of some heavenly glory. That's why our religion, our faith, is constantly grounding itself in ordinary things. Bread and wine, bread and juice, plain old tap, coffee, folding chairs. All of these things, when we come together in worship, we proclaim that these are holy things. Not because they are some sort of heavenly things, but because they are ordinary things. And God is here in the ordinary with us. That's where we will find God's presence. Now we are very tempted to stay with Peter up on the mountaintop. Because ordinary living is hard work. Living in covenant relationship takes give and it takes time. Even in church, when all of us are trying to be as nice as we can, as kind as we can, as giving as we can, there are still conflicts that we have. People of faith have different understandings, have different priorities, have different interpretations of what we should be doing here and now. And we've got to negotiate that, and we've got to work that out, and we've got to figure things out. Even when it's working well, everybody is going to be dealing with something they don't like about something that's going on. That is part of church life. And honestly, most of us are going to feel like we are doing more than our fair share of hard work. I read somewhere that in any marriage, any equal marriage, most partners feel like they are doing 80% of the work and their partner is doing 20%. That's just how it feels, right? And both partners feel that way. And when things are going, this is when things are going well. And they don't always go that well. But it feels like hard work because it is hard work. And Christian discipleship in the world is hard work. When you're away in some place and everything feels holy and good, it is easy to love everybody when you don't have to deal with anybody. But wait until you've sent 3 emails and 2 voicemails, and somebody comes up to you and they say, "But why didn't you tell me about it?" That's when love gets hard. That's when love is difficult, because here in everyday life, here down, not on the mountain, things are not so easy as they were up on the mountain. You know, Moses had the same problem. He was up on Mount Sinai for 40 days, and I have no questions about why he was up there for 40 days. I don't think he wanted to come back down. And he was right, because when he did come back down, it was such a mess that he broke the tablets and went right back up again. He said, oh gosh, God, I guess we're going to have to get a new set. Don't worry if it takes you a long time, I'll wait. Because ministry down the mountain takes work. We are broken, we are sinful people. We don't always do the things that we should. And even when we're all working our best and pulling in the same direction, it still feels hard. It still feels challenging. It's one thing to say, I want to go and serve people in need in my community. It's a whole other thing to look at our schedule and say, all right, what am I going to cut out? Am I going to not go to the gym? Am I going to quit yoga? Stop taking my kids to soccer? Are we not going to have family movie night? What are we going to give up? That's a different thing. It might be a painful thing. We'd much rather be in retreat, being perfectly spiritual people in perfectly spiritual communion with God. But the purpose of retreat, the reason that we call it retreat, is that it is a time to gather ourselves, to strengthen ourselves, to prepare ourselves to go back out into the world and work again. To go back out into the world and love bravely, boldly, and learn the deep holiness of ordinary things. Because the truth is that the lowest places on earth are often among the holiest places on earth. Because that is where we know that God's presence is. That is where we know that God resides. And that is where we will be partnered with God in our work. Our calling as Christians is not to live with our heads up in the clouds. Our calling as Christians is to experience that heaven and then bring heaven down to earth. We are here to be a community of the risen Christ, fully embodied together with all our fights and our flaws, so that people might know that God is not just up on the mountaintop. God is not just way up in the heavenly things, but down here with us in the ordinary things. And things that look ordinary or even rather profane. I want to tell you one story. There's a woman named Mary Clark. She grew up in Beverly Hills. She inherited her father's business. It was an office supply business in Hollywood. It did pretty well. And she was great at business. She was less good at marriage. But I don't really need to blame her. I suppose that's not true. That's a terrible transition. But she was divorced twice. And when her kids were grown, she had been doing charity work all her life. And she decided that she wanted to devote her life to God, but nobody wanted. No religious order would take some twice divorced 40-something-year-old lady. And so she said, you know what, I'm going to do it anyways. She sewed her own veil, and she went to church, and she made vows of fidelity and chastity and charity and kindness. And that morning, she put on a black dress, her homemade veil, and she declared herself to be Sister Antonia. So she made her vows, and then she went to Tijuana. She went to a place called La Mesa prison, which is one of the most notoriously difficult prisons in Mexico. She had volunteered there before, but now she went for this to be her place. She brought in anything that prisoners needed. Aspirin or blankets, eyeglasses, anything that she needed. Eventually, she got a contract to sell soda, and she used the proceeds from that contract to bail out low-level offenders. Now, she spent so much time there that they gave her a cell. She could go in and out, but most of the time she stayed in. Because that's where she was called to be. She had known God all her life. But she went to La Mesa prison and she said, it is good for me to be here. Let me live here. Nothing could be better than to bring God's glory into this place. This is the call of Christian discipleship. It is to go down the mountain. It is not to be above the world, but to be an ambassador of heaven on earth. Our church is the beachhead where we strengthen ourselves and reinforce ourselves so that we can go out into the world and call and proclaim and reveal God's holiness in the ordinary parts of the world, in the extraordinary, unpleasant parts of the world. It's not to lock ourselves up on a mountain or in an ivory tower or in a gated community. It is to go down into the world where things are not perfect, where things don't always feel holy or spiritual or holy, and partner with God to bring grace into those places. If our community itself is a retreat from the world, then we might have to go out from our community, so into those places where home is more difficult to find, into those places still filled with the stress and distress that we have protected ourselves from at home. But wherever it may be, in our ordinary lives, in extraordinary strife, we bring that heavenly kingdom that we glimpsed up on the mountaintop, or wherever we were, that Peter and James and John saw dazzlingly portrayed up on that mountaintop. We bring that with us and we say, with Sister Antonia, it is good for us to be here. Let us dwell in this place. Nothing could be better than to be God's disciples in this place. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.